Tell a story. Show us your chain. It's got my family on it and a number 7 and a half a heart. It's my heart is cut in half. I'm now in Spain. Just get fucking started, says Bjarne. So, tell us about your childhood. What do you think is so funny about art? Is there a place for art and humor? He's just completely disappeared. Oh, Lord. I had a nice day today. I'm in Spain, my family, just back from Berlin, where I did a project with Johann Koenig. Please help me find some concrete comedy. This isn't water comedy yet, concrete comedy. Oh, brother. Oh, well, you can look at the landscape. Trees are nice. Not terribly funny, but they're nice. Well, I certainly tried. Look at all these questions I have. Countless questions for David and his new book, which has just come out. I can't even pronounce the name. Akaraj. He was here a heartbeat ago. Will that do it? No. We were so close. Oh, brother. By the way, the borders are open here. All you have to do to get into the country is have your temperature taken. Is there someone in your universe? Now, in 5 minutes, we'll have a contest. Whoever comes on first and wants to be asked a lot of incongruous questions, you'll be the winner. Oh, well. Easy come, easy go. Strange. What button do I press to invite him? Can someone help me here? Tell you the details on the dolly. I took a lot of shit for posting this email that I received from someone trying to sell a Dolly foundation that I don't think exists for $250 million. And I asked them to send some documentation and some photographs to see what fake goodies they were selling besides Dolly's signature, which he seemed to give away so readily. Oh, brother, a bargain. And then I got a bunch of pushback about Dolly, which I couldn't care less about, to be honest, about how he beat up a blind person, beat up women, was a rather unsympathetic fellow. But I wasn't espousing anything to do with the artist. Here he is. Praise the Lord. Okay, the ball is in his court, folks. You can't blame me. Connecting.
Well, we may just have to do the audio because I don't have any screen.
Okay. Well,
It's okay. I'll still answer questions. They'll just lose, it won't be as charming.
I've never even seen you. I was looking for. Yeah. The last thing anyone wants to see is me. I don't know. You're on your phone and
don't sell yourself short.
It still says it's connecting. So, how do you pronounce? Is it Akaraj? The title of
Accrochage. Accrochage.
Accrochage.
Right, and that is a term. We should explain it immediately for the people. I did not encounter that term until I was living in Europe for a while, and then I would occasionally run across it. It's a French term.
Oh, Lord. It's a French term. Oh, really testing me. It's a French term that means the voice of God. Doesn't mean anything. It's getting awfully quiet in here. It's a great book. I read it. It's a screenplay. And it is meant to kind of combine a hybrid of arts and entertainment. And it is also meant to speak to a wider mainstream audience, which the art world has never quite had, and I'm not sure it ever will. So that would be an interesting question to ask David as he flies around in the ethosphere, probably never to return and leave me dangling. This is a too bad I can't do a puppet show or a tap dance, or too bad I don't have any jokes because I'm not that funny. Well, I can ask you guys questions. Ask me a question. I'm in south of Spain. I already answered that. You can have a puppet in this place of no video. I could do a hand puppet. Hi, I'm David Robbins. And I've been showing art since the mid-'80s, but not recently because I dropped out of the art world. Why did you drop out of the art world? I asked him about his book, Accrochage. I have a Long Island accent. It's hard to wing a French one. Has to do with hanging an art show with whatever's lying around the gallery. Some stand-up. I can't think on my feet fast enough. Why you'd always wear Adidas pants? Because they're comfortable and I dress for comfort. I gained 20 COVID pounds and the elastic waist does wonders. People making comments about various people I'm not at liberty to answer questions about. Come on, David. He came and he went swiftly twice. Oh well. Oh well. I'm not Johan Koenig who can do marathon after marathon of Instagram Live with or without. Oh well. Some nice people popping in and out. Rude comments coming in. Embarrassing. Any update on that dude who got arrested? He's still arrested. I'm very close to signing a deal to turn it into a movie and a documentary, so that's going to be fun. How do I pronounce my name? Try not to. Chapter. How much jail time should Inigo get? I would imagine between 2 and 5 years, if you ask me. I would like to see if what happens and whether the amount that he's charged with, $20 million, will go up substantially or not. Can I audition for the movie? Sure. God only knows who they're going to get to play me. Danny DeVito, probably. Well, some good names have actually popped up to produce the movie. Hardly, no. They're asking me about Inigo's girlfriend. Well, I can answer a question about Victoria Barker Haber, whatever. I received a cease and desist letter from her lawyer yesterday, not to make any memes about her, and I have never made a meme about her. I only ever mentioned her in my New York Magazine story, and everything I mentioned was 100% true. So I've answered that question. Where does he hide the paintings? That's a very good question. For shit, sure. Inigo has a load of art in storage that is buried in God knows whose name and where. But I could tell you certainly that he has art that he has yet to account for. And he wasn't just living in Vanuatu on fumes. So I don't see how we can do this. Well, that's not very encouraging. Where's Rodney Allen Ripley? What else was I going to say? Ask me another group of questions, and then I'm just going to hang up. Yeah, no, he definitely has some art stashed away. That is for sure. And eventually it'll pop up again. No, I never met Angela Gulbenkian, another great art dealer of our time, who waltzed off with. How come it always seems that Kusam is tied up in every contemporary art fraud that seems to go down? I just don't know if the feds are ever going to find his assets to liquidate, because I believe that he squirreled them away well out of the view of any investigators, since he knew what was coming. I heard a rumor that he was going to open a casino in Vanuatu. Up, he's here. Yay, saved by the bell. Lord, please come. There was an interesting article on Rudolf Stengel today in Bloomberg, and it seems that Inigo has had a hand in whacking.
This is fun.
Up, he's back.
This is really fun.
Yeah, it's clear from people.
I will. If it goes out again, we'll just say fuck it, and we'll figure out another way.
Okay, but anyway, you're here. So back to the title of the book.
Yeah, so accrochage is an old art world term for a gallery exhibition made from inventory. In other words, things that are not meant to go together. And this book is 3 different scripts that I sandwiched together to make a whole. Yeah, these were things I've been working on for some time, and finally decided, instinctively, I just put them together. And they mean something else by putting them together, which I like.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to get into too much detail because it's a great
Yeah.
book and it's good summer reading. So, because there are a couple of, I mean, I have to say, well, they were like 3, there were 3 disparate stories that were attached just by nature of being related in the same book. I found the first 2 went together in my mind, but I had trouble understanding the meaning of the third one, but maybe perhaps that's not something for us to totally explain right now. What do you say? Or are you gone already? Oh, for God's sakes. He keeps coming and going. Anyway, there was an article about Rudolf Stengel today in the Bloomberg, which is, I would love to find out what, there you are.
Yeah.
Is that you or?
Yeah. So I didn't hear anything that you said. I'm sure it was marvelous.
I have nothing marvelous to say, as everyone here can attest to. Okay, so the last part of the book seemed incongruous in relationship to the previous 2 parts.
Yes, of course, as is the second section. What I'm interested in is a sort of comparative juxtaposition of avant-garde-isms. And in the first section, which is about the art world or set in the art world, it's avant-gardism in the sort of systemic arrangement that the art world supports this particular behavior. In the second section, I remove the supports of avant-gardism and set it in the landscape that the avant-garde has always disparaged, which is the suburb. Historically, the avant-garde has always thought ill of the suburb. And the third section is I remove finally the author from the avant-gardism, and so you just encounter this thing in the countryside, going further away from the cosmopolitan center to an avant-gardism that is not authored. And that's the structure of the book.
Okay. And well, okay, so let's just talk about some of the more general themes. First, you talk about the fact that the intent of the book is to bring this kind of insider art knowledge that you have for being integrally connected to the art world since the 80s, and you're trying to bring this art knowledge to a mainstream audience. What do you think?
Yes.
Ability that the mainstream audience could ever be interested in such concepts about the insider art world?
Well, I mean, were we not once mainstream audience ourselves? I think I would be inclined to give them more credit. Also, I mean, just based on the evidence of in the last 2 years, I think there have been 3 mainstream movies, feature films about the art world: Burnt Orange Heresy, Velvet Buzzsaw, and The Square. And there's also a TV show called The Art of More, which was about the auction world. I mean, it's set in the auction world. And so that suggests that, I mean, what we've been observing the last 3 decades, or, sort of since I announced it with Talent in 1986, we've been observing this gradual convergence of the art and entertainment contexts, where art becomes more show busy and spectacular, and entertainment becomes more conceptual. So they're getting close enough that we can leap across the gap more easily than in the past. And so the idea that one could write such a book, I think, is, or one could make such an attempt. An artist could make an attempt to write a screenplay that was meant for popular consumption without, I think, sacrificing artfulness at the same time. That I don't think could have happened 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. I don't know. But it is of our time that an artist would attempt to do that.
Well, I mean, I agree in as much as I think that I always say that there's been more growth in the past 25 years of the art world than the previous 250 years. And I think out of all of those shows you mentioned, none of them have quite have reached over. Nice soundtrack. None of those films have extended appeal to a mainstream audience. Do you think they have?
Well, no, I agree with you. But one, that the fact that there were these efforts to make these films with that idea in mind suggests that eventually there will be success at it. And it's not especially important to me. It's not like a big goal in my life that happened, but seeing all of these attempts at picturing or portraying the art world by professional screenwriters who had no idea what they're talking about. They had no involvement in the art world. So what we end up with is a cartoon of the art world with cartoon people and etc. I mean, my people are cartoons too, but they're knowing cartoons. They're informed by how the art world actually works, and they're informed by real art world attitudes. And essences of how people behave in the art world. So, I don't need to, I'm not looking to change my life by selling a script to Hollywood. That's not the point. But I think that countering this sort of distortion that is being produced by other attempts by, people who are not familiar with the art world, the distortion that they were producing, I thought it was time to, let's just offer something else that actually knows what it's talking about. And that's sort of like, for me, that's the beginning and the end of the achievement. Whether somebody makes it into a movie is ultimately none of my business.
Right. Well, I mean, do you think there's an appetite for this type of book? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I've been doing this for 30 years myself. And as a writer and as someone who's involved in every facet of the art world, I've never thought that there would be anything remotely interesting to a mainstream audience that would ever appeal to these people. I understand that the audience has gotten so big and it's becoming a little bit enticing or sexy to people in the mainstream entertainment industry. But I guess until I had this situation with this art dealer, Inigo Philbrick, who was very young, attractive guy who stole an awful lot of money from a lot of powerful people. Not until this happened in my life did I ever even pretend, in my estimation, to think that there could possibly be a story that had to do with all of these issues that you talk about. You talk about things like the structure of the powerful, rich galleries having to help infiltrate artists into museums and institutions, how money and art are so integrally tied together, and how you even made a comment like people are turning into money. And these types of things, I think, are definitely of interest to more people. But I guess for me personally, not until there was a story involving the old-fashioned like 7 deadly sins, and there was booze, addiction, hookers, drugs, and private planes, and raves, and this kind of thing, would there even be potentially appeal to a wider audience?
Right. Well, that you may be right, but there really is kind of no predicting what people will go for, depending on how it's handled, and depending on how what we mean by mass audience. I mean, you have to take into account the fact that contemporary art has moved from this condition where 50 years ago it was something done by small groups of people in a couple of cities. Now it is global and ubiquitous as pop music. I mean, there's a sort of ubiquity of the same, major players showing up in each art fair and each biennial and all that sort of stuff. And that's a pop idea. That's a pop experience. So I just think that these things evolve, and just as we evolve as the makers, the audience evolves too, and the audience can be ready for certain things without their knowing that they're ready for it. You have to present it to them first. I mean, I worked for Mrs. Vreeland for a while, and what did she say? You don't give people what they want, you give them what they don't know they want. You follow?
Okay. And yeah, sure. I agree. I mean, I personally think that, I mean, there was the Price of Everything documentary, and now that I've stuck my feet in the water in relationship to the story I wrote for New York Magazine, which I'm attempting to sell through a Hollywood agent, since this story broke, there's been a lot of interest, and the story is going to sell on the scripted and the non-scripted side, and we're fielding offers right now. And
that's great.
I mean, I don't really care. The thing is, I'm just trying to recoup some of the money that was stolen from me, and I don't think I'm not looking to be presumptuous to think that I'm entering that business, and nor do I want to. But
No, it's smart. I mean, I've been conned twice in my life, and both times I turned it into material that I could sell.
Right.
So
So,
I made more from it than the people conning me. Now that may not be the case with you in your situation because the numbers are bigger,
can you
but
tell me
that's what I did.
what were those situations?
Once I was conned on the streets of Soho. I mean, it's a complicated story, which I think I wrote up in. I think you can find it in. Maybe it's at the end of Mr. Entertainment's diary. I'm not quite remember where I put it, but it was involving some antique coins and a kind of drunken stumblebum guy coming up to me and saying that he found these coins and there was a phone number and would I call the number for him, and it was a doctor, quote unquote, on Park Avenue, quote unquote, and there was a reward for the coins, these antique coins, which looked, they were in fact old coins, but they were hardly antiques. And the guy said, he's playing on my greed, and he said, if you give me $50, I mean, I can barely stand up. How am I going to get to Park Avenue? So if you give me $50, you can have the coins and you can go claim the reward. And like an idiot. So I actually, immediately after that transaction, I happened to run into Janelle at Metro Pictures, and I told her this, and she said, you've been conned. I said, no, 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 no. And an hour later, I called the doctor on Park Avenue. Of course, there's nobody there, and they've got you. But I converted that not only into a story in a book, but also into an editioned piece, yeah, where I did a limited edition of the story, and in the cover of the book that I made, I embedded the coins. But you didn't know whether you got the real coins or not, yeah, because it was edition.
Real fake coins or the fake real coins?
Yeah. So, it was, they conned the wrong person, in short.
I think the con man would have made a good art dealer.
I have affection for art dealers. Art dealers, I mean, although a lot of them have dropped me over the years, I admire their risk, their risk taking. They're in my experience more extreme characters than artists, considerably.
Considerably. Well, I've grown to love art dealers myself, and I tend to only do business with them whenever I get involved on the commercial side of art, because I always say that I can't sell crack to a crackhead. I mean, Inigo Philbrick sold one painting 5 times, and
right.
I have to admire that since I couldn't sell one once. So he had certain.
Well, but for example, we were talking about screenplays. In those other screenplays, the art dealer is always the villain. He's all it's a very easy villain to construct. But in my book, the art dealer is not a villain. I mean, you really don't know who the villain is. We should probably say that the story kicks off with a famous artist having vanished, and there's a detective who comes on this. It's very mystery genre, but there's a detective who's basically functioning as the audience, asking questions of people in the art world to try to determine what happened to this artist. So you find out all about the art world. But the dealers are not the bad guys in my story.
No, they're not the bad guys in my story. I used to kind of dislike it just when I first came into the art world, and people that worked in galleries would look you up and down and made all these determinations and judgments about you before you got past the threshold of the door. And I always found the kind of ecosystem of the art world to be very, let's say, unusual and so hierarchical and functioning on such a weird set of assumptions that, I mean, I guess everything I've done since then has all been analyzing the whole commercial dissemination of art once it enters the stream of commerce, basically. And
right.
I guess it could be pretty funny and pretty tragic simultaneously.
Well, I mean, I think dealers, it took me a long time to understand it, but, basically dealers want to be supported by the support that they give you. So they're betting that at some point you are going to reward the support they're giving you, which is a fairly reasonable thing and a fairly simple transaction. Right. The idea that a dealer will be so romantic about the whole proposition of art that they will stick by you regardless is, I think it's something from another day.
Right, but I also think, I mean, part of the problem where people have complained a lot in the last years, even before this horrible tragedy and crisis that struck the world at large, but people have complained about the struggles of small to mid-level galleries, and the business model itself has always been flawed, And it's never been easy for these galleries. And as soon as most of these artists that show in these types of galleries attain some level of financial success, they're often using those galleries as stepping stone and moving on
Sure.
to establishments that have become so prevalent.
Right.
So
Right. But you know, the version of the art world that you are participating in is different than the one I had been participating in. I mean, I have not done a proper art exhibition in 10 years. And the last one I did was an exhibition that argued that somebody else was an artist. That's how perverse I got about what I was doing, right?
Naftali and was at the Baskin Robbins installation.
No. The Ice Cream Social project went on for, 15 years or something like that. No, this was a project about my personal trainer who I thought had an artist in him, And it turns out, I mean, interestingly, his grandfather was the primary source of all the photographs in the Wisconsin Death Trip book, right? Do you know this book?
Yeah.
It's a very famous straight photography book. And so that was his grandfather. And so somehow, I mean, it's very interesting and mysterious how the art gene sort of traveled down into the grandson, who didn't even know he had it in him, but approached things approached personal training in an artistic way, in the sense that it was his medium. Yeah. So that was the last show I did, and that was 10 years ago.
That's too funny, because when I was in London and I collected a bunch of old cars, especially classic minis, and I fell in love with my mechanic, and he had such an incredible, enthusiastic, and curious mind. And I shared all the auction catalogs and all the books that I was reading at any given time. And he started making, I encouraged him to make art, and I put it in a couple of group shows, and even had some in a sale, a part of my collection I did at Sotheby's in December. And he sold some pieces in that sale, and he loved it. And he had such a great, I mean, I think a lot of the people in the art world are so jaded, they begin to lose enthusiasm for the very things that drew us in the first instance, which is a pure just love of art. And you talk a lot about in your writing, and I guess in your theories, that you initially, people get sucked into the art world for the right reasons, and then it turns into something else, something more mechanistic and less about creativity and more about rote ways of creating products for art fairs and all that kind of stuff. And
I think that's true.
you said,
and you also, I mean, as you progress and you become more successful, you separate from your artistic peers or the group of artists that you enjoyed so much in the early days, and you're now dealing mostly with collectors and curators, right? And that's less fun. It's just less fun. So I wanted out of that. I mean, I really stopped making what I considered to be, straight art exhibitions in 1989. There were another, dozen or so solo exhibitions that happened after that, but I was no longer addressing art. I was doing something else. I thought I was doing comedy.
Vito Acconci, who's an artist that I just admire and respect so much, he also quit out of the art world in around 1989, opening an architectural and design studio. And for the same reasons, he was fed up with the art world, and he continued to struggle, though, because the art world really, it's incredible how when you flit around and do different things and try to experiment, it's frowned upon in the commercial art world, where they just want to see more of the same, and whatever success affirms success. And that seems to be what the market embraces, is just more of the same. And the more you try to go further afield and take the possibilities of failing and fucking up and falling on your face, which should be encouraged. I'm getting attacked by bugs all over on every level, but that's enough.
I'm sorry.
So poor Vito, who died destitute with nothing, is a tragedy when someone was so talented and such an important and seminal artist for so many generations.
Well, I didn't leave the art world because I was sick of the art world, and I'm, it's very difficult to leave the art world once you're in it. I mean, the fact that I'm talking to you means that I'm still in the art world. So, but I left I withdrew. That's a better word, I think. I withdrew from the art world because I was finding that to make an art exhibition, that the art system was formatting my imagination to produce for it, and that's fine for people who really have a commitment to art as a category and maybe a particular medium, like they're painters or whatever. But I really came to understand that my deeper imprinting was entertainment imprinting, and art was a veneer on that imprinting. And art is very interesting. It's good to know about, et cetera, but it actually was inauthentic to the way that my imagination actually works. And so once I came to understand that, and I only came to understand that through immersion in the art world. I mean, for easily 10 years, that's all I did was the art world, and did a lot of exhibitions and did it and was excited and it was thrilling and all that sort of stuff. But eventually I stopped performing David Robbins for the art system and I started being David Robbins, right? And being David Robbins is somebody who acknowledges that his first imprinting is entertainment imprinting, which means television, pop music, movies, comic books, all of that stuff, which doesn't mean that I want to do all of it, but I want to do some of it. And that everything should be made art was something that I felt very uncomfortable with, and I felt very constrained by that idea. I'm fine with art, like generally speaking, but I don't want to dedicate my life to producing it. I like the idea of doing it once in a while if an idea is appropriate for art. But I want to make products, I want to write books, I want to, all of that sort of thing that I have committed myself to doing. I mean, the Concrete Comedy book took 10 years to write. You can't do that if you are on the professional contemporary artist's hamster wheel of constant production of art.
And who is the intended audience for that book? An art audience, a more general public, like you're intending for your new book?
I mean, all of these, I tried. My mentor was a guy named George Tro, who wrote for The New Yorker, wrote Within the Context of No Context and things like this. And what I learned from George Tro was, plain language, fancy thinking. So the language shouldn't be fancy. The language shouldn't put anybody off. The language should be accessible and should be available to anybody who's capable of reading. But the thinking should be fancy. Yeah.
My writing is simple because that's my thinking as well.
I doubt it. So, I mean, who did I write the Concrete Comedy book for? The future. Yeah. That it's for people who are like me, who will discover that in fact they are theater people first or comedians first, and their comedy is playing out through objects or material culture. Yeah. But they are people of theater first and artists second.
Because you say you believe in imagination but not art. Do you not believe in art objects? Well,
any kind of art object works or is powered by your belief in it. If you deny that object your belief, then it's just a pile of materials or an arrangement of materials. So it's your belief. So it's basically faith-based. Yeah, it's your belief that there's actually something happening there that makes something happen there. And what I found is that I was not a believer. Simple as that. I was not a believer. I can enjoy an artwork, et cetera, but again, to dedicate my life to the production of such things, I could not do, and I didn't find that out until I was well into it. So yeah, it's a faith-based activity. Fundamentally, we don't recognize it as such, but it is a kind of religion, or it's a kind of displaced religion. Yeah, and that's okay. And if you agree to believe, then the reward is various and huge and delivers all sorts of transcendence, just like another religion. But if you deny it your belief, then you can't get to those qualities of transcendence. And I was just personally configured in such a way that I couldn't believe it. So I had to find other uses for my imagination. I had to find other uses for my conceptual sophistication, for my visual sophistication, all that sort of stuff. And so I had to sort of carve out these other possibilities. Concrete comedy was one. High entertainment was another. High entertainment is the idea of you dump the specialized language of art, but you retain the experimentation of art, and you do that within entertainment forms. Yeah. So you combine the accessibility of entertainment with the experimentation of art. That's high entertainment.
That's your notion of a hybrid. I mean, somehow, obviously, it's a leap of faith that, I mean, for people to pay millions of dollars for $6 of pigment on a canvas with some wood stretcher. So for sure there's a leap of faith. There's also a leap of faith involved in many other professions as well. Even by
Of course.
in the stock market, run to a great extent by psychology. And
The Constitution of the United States is only, it's nothing more than some ink on parchment, unless you believe that there's more to it than that. But but the thing is about art is that it requires belief in order for it to run. That's the problem that I had with it, that it required my belief. And something like entertainment meets you more than halfway. It isn't that entertainment is without the use of a specialized language. It's that the distribution systems of of entertainment were so successful that we're basically raised by the stuff. So there's no sense of learning the language as there is with art. That's the difference. And so I muck about in these questions. My artist friends, and most of my friends are artists, are very tolerant of my unbelief, and they're very tolerant of my skepticism toward the whole practice, because I think that they understand that there's some validity to the questions that I'm posing, and primarily about the gray area between art and entertainment.
Well, somehow I think that your work fits within a rubric of conceptual art in some overarching form. Somehow it all seems to relate in a continuum thread to the work that you've been doing since the 80s. But
it's probably the case. I mean, we do tend to believe that there is no escape from the art world. And I'm not sure that that's true, but, I do think that it is entirely possible, as I think I've demonstrated over the last 20 years or so, to produce things that don't work in the art world, that they don't fit in the art world, or that they're not well served by the art world.
Your most successful, have you had any commercially successful projects within this gray zone that you live in Milwaukee?
Commercially successful.
Yeah.
I mean, I really am an experimenter. I keep searching. I don't have a style. I don't have something that I want to do again. I don't, for me, it's this searching is the destination. I'm just built that way. So have I had a commercial? No, I mean, I'm still probably trying to do that. I did make a TV pilot for the Sundance Channel, that sort of thing. But I don't really care enough about that. I don't need that kind of approbation. I'm secure enough that I just go on to the next thing. And the reason for doing what I do is not for the approbation of an audience. I do it because I'm interested to pursue certain things, and I do that to the best of my ability, but it keeps changing form, and it often changes, medium or context or whatever. So I don't really, I mean, I'm not a big success guy. I don't really care. I want an interesting life.
You sound terribly suited to the entertainment business if you don't care about an audience or...
Yeah, sure. Well, I stumbled into the art world. I started I worked at the factory, and that's how I sort of got into the art world.
When was that? That job, and what did you do there?
Oh, that was like end of '79 to the middle of '81, something like that. And that was for interview. But when you're at the factory, you do all sorts of things. I mean, if you're interested to. And Andy, it was very clear to him that I would work for him on Saturdays and stuff like that when there wasn't anybody else there but Vincent. So it was fascinating. The thing about working at the factory, I think that it confirmed my multidisciplinary inclinations, for one thing. And the second, I got to watch the king of the art world up close. And and so I didn't have to try to replicate that in my own experience, because I saw what it was like. I saw who comes to lunch and what Andy has to do and all this sort of stuff. And it was it was great to be liberated from that, because I think a lot of artists are trying to replicate those conditions in their own success.
And you say the community of people that you're closest to remain artists.
Yeah, I would say, yes, I think so. I mean, that broadly speaking, some are writers, some are filmmakers, etc. But yes, everybody is aesthetic, yeah.
Okay, how about some stupid questions? Well, first, I have another question. Like, do you think humor can be beautiful? Like, everyone seems beauty is still this kind of underlying notion that everyone seeks to attain. Or if you ask someone in the street about their idea about art, or frequently art is still, after all of the conceptual art and political, social, economic art, there's still this kind of ideal of beauty that is sought after in art. And do you think there's something similar in humor, or is there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I derailed my art career by, at a certain point, beyond a certain point, I think beyond 89, I was trying to make the most beautiful comedy I could make. Yeah. Not the most beautiful art I could make. But so the comedy was the thing the beauty that I was interested in pursuing, and the art had to be good enough to convey that. It had to be good enough to hold your gaze, to be able to look at it more than once, et cetera, to behave, somewhat like art. But the organizing principle of the production of those objects was trying to make the most beautiful comedy I could.
What artists do you relate to, historically or contemporary, that somehow have a common shared sphere of interest with you in relationship to humor and comedy?
Carl Valentin was really do you know who Carl Valentin is? Carl Valentin was a German comedian who he died in 1948, but he really is the guy who invented the idea of the comic object. It wasn't that, which is an object made with comic rather than aesthetic intent. Yeah, and Valentin is really the guy who invented that proposition. It wasn't that nobody had ever made a comic object before him, but he's the one who did it with, consistency and the pursuit of it. And not only did he invent the comic object, but he also understood well enough that object does not belong in a gallery or museum. So he invented his own context for it, which was the Carl Valentin Museum, which was originally in the basement of the Hotel Wagner in Munich.
You don't normally associate Germans with a sense of humor, if I could.
Well, Kippenberger, Georg Harold. I mean, sure, they're great. They can be great, and Valentin was important to those guys.
Interesting. To Georg Harold and Kippenberger and those types of artists. Yeah.
I mean, I lived in Cologne for a year and had contacts with those guys, and it's certainly they're much bigger personalities than my own, and they're much stronger people than I am. But I was able to sort of model myself after them to the degree that I could, or to pick up some tips on how to proceed. So those guys, there really were not Americans that I identified as having anything to do with what I was interested in. The way that I mean, comedy is kind of the weak sister, generally speaking, in the art world, and always has been. And I'm losing my train of thought. And that the whole idea of the way that entertainment is supposed to be treated in the art world is supposed to keep it at arm's length. You sort of treat it critically, and you're not really supposed to embrace it. And that's part of the significance of that piece, Talent, in 1986, is that I collapsed that distance, right? So, and I said artists are entertainers, or floated the idea.
Do you follow the art market, or some of your previous works flowing through the commercial system?
Do I follow the art market? I mean, I monitor the art world from afar. Yeah, I look at art websites. I read you.
Thank you.
For example, right? So I kind of know what's going on, but I don't feel particularly my sensibility, I think, would not work well at all these days. So it's a good idea that I'm sitting it out.
Why do you say? I don't necessarily agree.
Well, it's a pretty ferocious time, and with very, very real and valid concerns. So I tend to approach just about everything as theater and as material to not make fun of, but to make fun from. And I just don't think that that's I don't think that I'd be comfortable doing that in this context.
In the fine art context, or in relationship to what's happening in the world today?
Well, that's happening in the fine art context too. So They're not really separate. I just am not interested in, it's not interesting to me. I mean, I don't want to have to make objects all the time. I don't want to have to be thinking in terms of this video will be an art video that will play in an art space. You know, I wanted to be liberated from that. I really wanted to have full access to my own imagination. That was the principle. And if you need full access to your own imagination, you have to identify anything that is preventing that. And for me, the art system was preventing that. It was preventing full access to my own imagination.
But don't you think,
so it had to go.
Like, I mean, I just forced your hand to sign up to Instagram, and I always find
Yes.
kind of like democratic wrecking ball blasting through these long established and entrenched hierarchies in the art world, and it's a great delivery system. Especially, I like the fact that it was never intended to impact on the art world, because I don't think there's a single website that was ever created to be a platform for art has ever succeeded. Not the one I write for or any of the other ones, nor do I think they ever will be. They're just a giant hole for investor money. But I think Instagram is the closest thing we have as a direct means of communication from all walks of life in all corners of the globe.
If the phone works.
When the phones are embedded in your forehead, you still won't be able to get a connection, and you'll still be walking around the streets screaming into your head, hello, 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 hello. That's just
right
of the beast. But hey, I've managed to see a frozen picture of your face for the last 40 minutes, so we've
charming
progress.
Okay, let's keep going. Let's move away from that.
So, you grew up in Milwaukee, correct?
Right. I mean, you know, I didn't hate the suburbs, and so eventually, I actually came back to take care of my aging, sick parents, but I found that there were really interesting people here. I mean, there are really interesting people everywhere. That's the thing that's changed. The web and the distribution of information has changed the game. Yeah. And so the idea that, you know, in 1979, I had to move to New York to get the New York information. Sure. I don't have to do that today. I have 70% of the same information that somebody in Manhattan has at the same time they have it. And the other 30% is who's at the dinner. And who's at the dinner matters a lot. It matters a lot. I understand that. Because that's where the deal made. That is where, you know, relationships are formed, all that sort of thing. But in terms of actually being, you know, up to speed on what's happening in the world, I know just as well as anybody in one of the centers what's happening.
And do you go to galleries and museums where you are?
Don't go to the museum. I do, you know, I have an association with Green Gallery, but I don't go to every show. I mean, I really am quite serious about, you know, I have moved out of the context, and it's just not something that I need to be immersed in, well, and that I need much contact with. I have my own ideas and my own things that I need to get done. So, I mean, I work all the time, and, you know, to no benefit to myself, but it's what I like to do.
When did you leave New York City?
I left New York City in '87.
Whoa.
And but the you know, that the relationship with New York was still home through '93. In other words, I moved to Europe, and then I was still doing shows in New York. So I would move back to New York, and I would do a show there for Colin or whoever it was. And then I would go back to Europe. So there were like 7 years of a lot of back and forth. So I still considered New York my home through '93, but then I stopped. It just wasn't, I wasn't going to keep doing it.
You used to show with Colin DeLand.
I showed with lots of people. Yeah, I mean, Colin and I had a very good, friendly, funny working relationship from '85, I think. Through '89, and then I did a show that he hated and he dropped me. So, you know, that happens.
That doesn't sound so. I mean, Colin was the least commercial person I think I ever met that operated a gallery, or at least tried.
Well, that just tells you how much he hated it.
What was the show?
Or me.
What was that show?
Oh, that was an early attempt to sort of, you know, make this hybrid stuff of art comedy. But I was approaching it from the wrong end at that point. That was '89, '90, and so I had just, you know, announced to myself my disbelief in art, and now I was moving into making comedy. But I still, you know, evolution is slow. So the first couple of shows were very much an attempt to meld comedy and art in an object that behaved like an art object. And that's what I did for Colin, and he hated it.
Did you ever do stand-up comedy?
No, no, no. I mean, I don't know that I don't know that I'm funny that way. I'm funny in conversation, but I'm not funny in terms of that sort of presentational style, I don't think.
Were you funny in school growing up?
Yeah, always. Yeah, I mean, I'm just funny. What can I tell you?
But
Thank God.
it lasts 45 minutes though. But like, are people always expecting you to be the one cracking jokes and telling stories in those dinner parties in Milwaukee you go to?
Oh, well, that's another thing that doesn't happen. I mean, there is a social version of it here, just as there's a social version of it anywhere. But I don't participate. I mean, I really don't. I've never been comfortable with a high concentration of artists. You know, back in the days of Nature Mort, when I showed there, that was the very beginning. And I would be hanging around with Stephen Perino and Joel Otterson and you know, the gang, and they would be having a conversation, and I could understand it intellectually, but I was asking myself, do they actually believe this, right? So there was always a separation. I mean, the difference between myself and you know, which was announced from the first exhibition, the difference between myself and other artists was that I actually was using the role of the artist as material. That's what I was interested in. I was interested in the mortar and not the brick.
It's funny because I remember before I first entered the art world professionally, I thought everyone was running around drinking absinthe and cutting organs off of their body and going nuts. And I went to law school to hide from the marketplace, but it turned out I was so disturbed and taken aback by the fact that the art world was more conservative than the legal world that I had briefly dallied in and worked in. And yeah. And then it became bigger than the business that I was running away from. So the whole thing is a giant kind of paradox. And I've always considered myself to sort of, I mean, not for lack of trying, but I'm sort of stuck on the outside, even though I have a foot definitely on the inside from nature of my platform writing. But most of the mainstream art world, I think, looks more askance at what I do. And I'm certainly not embraced by mainstream and have no participation with collectors or museums for that matter. But,
well, I wasn't. I mean, that's been my career. You know, I mean, I have the support of, you know, Obrist and Pierre Huyghe and people, you know, good people, but it's not an endless list. So, you know, but you just keep going. It doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't have to. You keep identifying. The challenge is to keep identifying ideas that you actually want to do. And you're talking about, I mean, that one thing that you know, like art students are not told is how long they're going to have to be artists. It just goes on and on and on. And so, you know, fortunately, I am personally weird. And so I just have this bottomless well of weirdness that keeps coughing up ideas that I want to, you know, oh, let's do that. Right. So, you know, I don't have any concern that I'm going to run out of that.
Right. But I still think there's room in the art world. You may not be embraced commercially, but I still think there's room for just those pursuits. And your mindset seems very similar in nature to how I feel and think about the art world. But I mean, I think comedy is the language with which visually, like I make these videos and two-dimensional works, and they're always imbued, or at least I try to, or at least I think so, have some level of comedy coursing through them.
Yeah, but they're on the web. They're on the web, and the web is a neutral ground.
Yeah, but I mean,
that was a really important thing, that the web came along and sort of solved some of these problems that I had with the art world for a long time, because now I had a place to put all this stuff that was, you know, it didn't have to go by curators, it didn't have to behave like art. So the fact that, you know, you can't forget or overlook the fact that you're putting it on the web.
Yeah, but I mean, so how come you haven't been more ready to take advantage of some of these technological changes in the last 10 years?
Like what? Years? I mean, like Twitter or something? What do you mean?
Oh, I mean, I think we're going to be cut off because this thing cuts out. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I don't mean, I don't really
I
do
mean, I
Twitter
think I
because I
have like
can't.
65 videos on, I have 65 videos on Vimeo, something like that. So I have taken advantage of it. I mean, I really dedicated myself to producing for that neutral ground because it didn't have to be art. That was extremely
Right.
attractive to me.
Well, I think that you should, now that you've signed up for an Instagram account, I think that you should explore trying to express yourself and your weirdness in such a context because it seems suited to it.
Well, now I realize that we can do a TV show on Instagram, so that's great.
That's an interesting idea. You definitely could, and it's people have made.
Absolutely, that was my first idea.
I think like before we're going to get cut off in a minute because I guess we're only having allotted time unless you want to kick it off again. But I think that yeah, I think these types of a TV show or just trying to communicate with people in a more ready, easy, accessible fashion is a great characteristic. Which is not what I was going to say, but I completely forgot and lost my train of thought.
Well, Kenny, the thing is that I happen to be constructed in such a way that I don't need attention. I really don't. I'm happy making this stuff and putting it out and going on to the next one. I don't need to be celebrated. I don't, et cetera, et cetera. I need certain things to succeed when other people have invested in it.
You need an audience, someone to finish the act.
I have an audience. I don't have a sense of the audience, but I have an audience.
I appreciate that.
I know the idea of trying to pull me back into the art context. It's